Guys, welcome back to another episode of Clone Force 97. I'm your host, Charles, and I am joined by Brandon and Anthony Ray Bench. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast so you never miss an episode of the action. Today, we're going to be discussing a few things. First, we're going to be discussing the Rey movie getting pushed back, as well as the new leak for Simon Kinberg's alleged Star Wars trilogy. And lastly, we're going to be discussing everything that you need to know before we jump into Skeleton Crew. So, join the Clone Force and let's get this started. Brendan, you want to start us off?
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Glad to be back for our second episode. Obviously, as Charles said, we're going to start with the Rey movie being pushed back from its original date of December 2026. I don't think a new date has been confirmed yet. I do know that the new Ice Age movie has taken the place of the Rey movie, which I think is beneficial for Star Wars because 2026 is already going to be a big year for Star Wars because we're going to have the Mandalorian and Grogu movie coming out. And Star Wars has already kind of felt this before when they were doing like the Rogue One, Han Solo, like in between, like while also releasing the main movies. So by pushing it back, I think they're helping by not oversaturate the market. I was telling you guys this earlier, but like with that movie, if it had come out in 2026, it would have given the same feel for me as it had did with like Andor. 2022, we had Book of Boba Fett, we had Obi-Wan, we had Andor, Bad Batch season 2, like, and then also if you're somebody who's into the novels, you have the High Republic novelizations coming out on like a pretty much a bi-monthly schedule. So it was really hard for me to catch up after I'd missed the first couple episodes. It took until this year for me to finally finish Andor.
Andor is a slow burn for sure. Um, I think that I was kind of captivated by it, and I watched it upon release. Like I tuned in, but I know that a lot of my friends were like, I just couldn't get into it. It didn't feel a lot like Star Wars, where there's like a bigger world. It's a much smaller story, and focused on less characters rather than kind of an ensemble. Um, but I wish like I think my perfect release slate for Star Wars would be a movie every year. I think that that's fair. Like Marvel does it too much. I think Marvel at one point was doing 3 movies a year, and that was way too insane for me. But a movie a year I think is fine. And maybe 2 TV shows going on, like one in the early part of the year, one towards the end, or one towards kind of the middle. And I'm not talking about like animation. I'm just talking about live action. I think 2 would be great and not overwhelming. And I don't really keep tabs on the novels, so I'm not, super oversaturated. So that definitely factors in. But I don't know. Like there's a delicate balance for everybody, and I think my delicate balance is a movie a year is fine. 2 TV shows a year is fine. Anything else other than that is just too overwhelming for me.
Yeah, I can agree with that. It's like and it doesn't give I feel like when they do too many things all back to back together, especially like with 2 movies in a year and things like that, it doesn't give people time to like breathe before the next release. And it also I feel like they have less time to promote these things if they're like focusing on promoting one thing in the beginning of the year, one big movie, and then all of a sudden that one ends and they have crunch time to promote the next movie that's coming out. So I think giving that a lot of space, I can agree. Like 1 movie, 2 TV shows a year would be brilliant. As far as live action goes, you can give me all the animated shorts that you want. And also, yeah, I'm not. I think I talked about it last week, but not a huge reader. I read very well. I just hate reading. But I will say I bought a book this week that I'm hoping will change that, called Jedi Battle Scars, because it's the in between Fallen Order and Survivor. Sorry, I'm getting off topic. But that's the first one that I'm going to start with. I ordered that. I'm going to start trying to read that. But yeah, I want them to take more time with the Rey movie anyway. I want them to I'm really hoping that this movie will be a chance for her to win over the part of the fandom that is not particularly fond of her. I'm hoping to see some really awesome things about the Jedi and the history of it, And we're also they're working on a Jedi Origins movie. I cannot remember the name of it, but they've greenlit that as well. So it's based on the book that tells the story of the beginning of the Jedi, 30,000 years before the main events of Star Wars. So I'm hoping that they add some really great content for her and give her a chance to shine, and also I'm just as excited, if not more excited, for Mandalorian and Grogu because I want to see where Grogu's character arc goes. I'm hoping by the end of this movie he says his first word or something like that, And I want to see, is he going to talk backwards too? Because I think they explained in a book that the reason Yoda does that is because of who Yoda's Jedi Master was. That's how they spoke. So I'm just like, okay, so not all of them speak in riddles, you know, but I'm super excited for that. I think that I just want to know what happens after episode 9, really, you know.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for the Rey show isn't even Rey. Like, it's Finn. Like, Finn in episode 9 was just delegated to a screaming role. Like, he just was just there to yell Rey the entire movie and was on like the cusp of mentioning anything. And the most development we got for him was in the Lego holiday special. Like, we haven't actually seen Finn do any of these things that like he's supposed to be doing or really get to be himself, because he got like, I mean, he stood up in episode 7, and then in 8 there was that huge like, should it be a love interest, would there not be a love interest kind of scenario, and then in 9 they just immediately went away from it. And I really think they got to get John Boyega back so he can finally get the development he deserves, and him and Rey lead whatever new Jedi Order that they're going to create together, or him decide he doesn't want to be a Jedi. I'd love to see him as one, but we don't know what his path is.
Yeah, the natural progression of Finn's storyline should have been, he starts out as a coward and a deserter. The second movie, he, learns why people fight and really, kind of dedicates himself to that fight. And the third movie should have been he embraces his role as a leader. And that kind of mirrors Rey's progression as well. And I was excited to this was before I saw the movie and spoilers happened. I was excited to see Finn as a character who starts out as a stormtrooper, rejects that life, and becomes a Jedi, because all of the marketing materials had him with the lightsaber, and obviously it was a swerve and everything like that. But when it was like, okay, he isn't the force sensitive one, you know he isn't gonna go on the path of the Jedi. Okay, like, it made sense that he would kind of become a leader and learn to fight for something beyond who he is and beyond, you know, his own kind of bubble world. Like, he saw the galaxy outside of his experiences. And they were heading in that direction. And then episode 9 with the whole like, Rey, I have a secret. I have a secret. And you find out, not in the movie, by the way, because this is what J.J. Abrams does. You find out that his secret was that he was force sensitive. It comes out of nowhere. It's not touched on in any of the other movies. It's just stupid and clumsy. I would have liked, the continuation of The Force Awakens and the Disney trilogy, to have Rey reestablish the Jedi Order, but Finn is leading, the New Republic, or the New Republic, or whatever it's going to be called post, episode 9. I'm a little worried that the Rey movie isn't going to happen. And I'm a little worried that they're just going to focus on the Simon Kinberg trilogy, which, from everything I've heard, is going to be disconnected from everything we've known in Star Wars. Like, it's going to either take place, far in the future, which I kind of hope for. So where the characters we know and love, most of them are passed on or retired or at some but Disney has had a nasty habit of announcing projects and not even officially canceling them, just not bringing them up. You can go back to the Ryan Johnson trilogy that was announced, And for years Ryan was saying, "No, it's still happening. It's just the timing isn't lined up." The Rogue Squadron project that Patty Jenkins was going to do, that's not been brought up, and then it was canceled, and then they said, "Oh, we're going to actually do it after Wonder Woman 3 wasn't going to happen." Like, I'm worried that this is just going to be the habit moving forward. Like, Disney is becoming Kevin Smith, where they're just going to announce all these different movies and none of them are going to happen. They're never going to be touched upon. I know of some projects that, were this close to being, pushed through to the green light phase and it didn't happen. And I think that Disney needs to be careful about that, because that kind of it creates an environment of distrust where it's like we get excited about these projects. And I would love to see the continuation of Rey and her journey. Like, I would love that. But I don't know. Like, are you guys worried that's not going to happen? Because I certainly am.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 1,000%. I mean, one of the things that I'm still not happy that they announced and they haven't done anything for in years was announcing a remake of Knights of the Old Republic. I've been waiting on new news for years, dude. That's one of my, like, as far as like the old school Star Wars games go, but they haven't said anything about it in years. And I'm like, okay, so yeah, definitely I can agree with like being afraid that they're not gonna release that. And also, I feel like on Disney's part, I feel like the Acolyte kind of threw them for a loop because a lot of the newer shows have been getting like hate, on them. Like Kenobi wasn't completely well received, and other, live action shows weren't very well received. And so I think with what happened with the Acolyte and just the straight up bombing that it got from multiple review sources and stuff like that, I think that now they're like, they're listening a little bit more to what, not the majority, but the negative stuff that people are saying. And like Rey is also one of those characters that that part of the fandom, I should say, does not like, and everybody wished it had been Finn instead of Rey and stuff like that. I will say
Yeah.
what I'm particularly excited for, seeing hopefully the movie does still get pushed through and made, and what Brandon was talking about. I just watched the other night. I was like, dude, I've been rewatching the same shows all year, dude. So I was like, let me watch something different. And the Lego Star Wars Christmas special was there. And I was like, yep, gonna watch that. And then it starts with Rey training Finn in the ways of the Jedi. And the whole premise of that movie is her trying to figure out how to teach him. She doesn't know yet how to teach people what she's learned, because her
Mm.
training was extremely limited as well. And so she's like trying to figure it out. But I love that because that to me was just them being like, hey, don't worry. This is where we want to go with it. You know what I mean? Like, this is what we would like to do with Finn, because that's what the fans, I had no problem with the way that things went in the sequel trilogy as far as like Rey's character arc. Anthony, I do agree with you that I feel like Finn should have been in more of a leader role, or a more pivotal role, I should say, with the Resistance.
Yeah.
But there were things about his character arc that I still do love. Because, like you said, he started off as this coward deserter, and then throughout those three movies, he has, in Force Awakens, he almost bails out on everybody because he's so scared of everything. But then the moment he realizes like people are in danger, Rey's in danger, and people need him to help, he grabs that lightsaber and he goes out there, and he fights the First Order head on. And then you see him; he has tons of moments, I think, where you kind of look at him and he can go either way with it. You don't know what he's
Mm.
gonna do. In Episode 8, when he's like, he basically tries to desert again, but that was for the sake of protecting Rey, right?
Yeah.
Like he had the beacon. He did not want Rey to come back to the ship. He was trying to get out of there to protect his friend. And then in Episode 9, he leads what is essentially would have been a suicide mission, you know, onto the Imperial Star Destroyer, to disable their I think it's the communications between all the ships.
Yeah.
Like he does some really cool things. And I will say I also agree with you, the whole I got a secret to tell you, I got a secret to tell you, and then it never getting out, no development with that at all is so lazy. But I still want Finn as a Jedi, so whatever, cool, throw that little tidbit in there. Just let me. What color is his lightsaber, dog? That's all I want to know, dude.
I don't have any fear that it isn't going to happen. I know that they've gone through, what are they, on their second writer now, which is part of the reason for pushing it back. I don't think that this is something that isn't going to happen, but at the same time that they pushed this back, they had also started talking about doing a trilogy for Rey specifically. Like, aside from what we saw in like the sequels, where like they were kind of wrapping up Han and Leia and Luke. Like, this will be like a new one, kind of like the standalone film was supposed to be like that mid gap film that like a lot of people didn't get, like where the original Star Wars fans who saw the original trilogy in theaters should have gotten. Like, they should have gotten to see Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher evolve Luke and Leia into what they were supposed to be, instead of just inferring what happened during the gap. So instead of that, movie is supposed to be her coming of age, becoming stronger as a Jedi, and then this new trilogy that's rumored for Rey is supposed to be like the passing of the baton, which would then be like a 10, 11, and 12. It's not confirmed that they're going to call it a 10, 11, and 12, but that's where like they're falling on it. And then that's like where the rumors of like this Simon Kinberg trilogy, like from stuff I'm seeing online, is like, is his trilogy the Rey trilogy, or is it going to be something different? I mean, honestly, from my experience, Simon Kinberg, I mean, if he gets a trilogy, he's the executive producer of, in my opinion, the best Star Wars animated show of all time in Rebels. I don't think he could really do any wrong. I think he understands the lore and understands what needs to happen. I think his trilogy would be amazing, whether it be with Rey or with someone else.
Well, clearly, my friend, you haven't seen X-Men Dark Phoenix, because Simon Kinberg stunk that film up for sure. And that was a lot of studio interference as well.
That was him,
Um,
though. I didn't know that.
yeah, Simon Kinberg directed that. He also wrote X-Men 3: The Last Stand, which he's responsible for my two least favorite X-Men films, and I'm a big X-Men fan. So I'm a little worried about his trilogy. But everything I've heard about it is that it's going to be separate from the main storyline. It's going to be its own thing. And I think that that's the way to do it. Disney has shown kind of a bad habit of not taking the valid criticism and changing the properties. Instead, either completely rejecting criticism, no, you're wrong, we're going to do it our way, we're going to hire people who have a very strict vision of what they want to do, even if it does, kind of betray the essence and the spirit of Star Wars, or they completely cave in and cater towards the people who don't like the product. So I think that they need to hold a delicate balance. Like, they need to, everything's about balance in Star Wars. They need to be like, all right, there's things that we can do better. Like, we need to, add more production time. We need to, really have a script that works. We need to have a director in place. We don't need to rush our projects. We need to make better stories. Great. That's something that you can run with, and that's something that would, obviously help the product, and fans would really be excited about, because so many of these projects do feel rushed, and they don't feel like they have a logical ending point. They feel like they're just making it up on the fly. I would definitely accuse The Mandalorian and definitely the Book of Boba Fett of kind of doing that, where it's like, we'll figure it out as we go along, not like, here's the beginning, the middle, and the end. But with the Rey movie, like, and as far as I heard, like, it was just going to be a standalone film. It needs to happen. I want it to happen. I don't want it to be canceled. I feel like it's going to be canceled. I feel like they're not going to address it. It's just going to float out into the ether, like the Rian Johnson trilogy, like the Taika Waititi, announced movie. I think he even was announced to do a trilogy, or maybe it was just a standalone. Um, but there needs to be, kind of, the criticisms of the Rey character need to be addressed. Like, I think that they need an in canon, like, explained, like, here's why she was so powerful in the Force. Here's why she learned so quick. Like you mentioned, on the last episode, the dyad forming. If they
Mhm.
explain that in film, that would be great. A lot of people would be like, okay, that makes sense. Maybe it's
Yeah.
not a good idea, but it's something that it was addressed. It's not just something that was here it is on screen. There's no explanation for it. I think that the character of Rey needs to really stand out um, against the Jedi characters that we've seen on film. She's establishing a new order. She's learning. She's making mistakes that other characters haven't. She's not an Obi-Wan clone. She's not a Luke Skywalker clone. She's not an Anakin clone. She is her own character. And I feel like Disney really needs to take the good suggestions and advice, implement them, filter out the bad stuff like, oh, diversity, she's a woman, she shouldn't be leading the Jedi Order, all that crap. Like, ignore that, but really kind of listen to the fans and listen to what they want and, give that to them without being antagonistic. Like, I saw a lot of really bad, awful stuff with the Acolyte, how, they were criticizing the cast and, that's dumb. We need to stop doing that. There's criticism of the writing. Okay, like let's listen to that. Let's have an open dialogue about that. Let's not just say, well, you hate it because it's written by a woman and the showrunner is a woman. It's like, no, the format of the with the flashbacks, like, Charles, you bring that up a lot, and I agree. Like it's a complete like brutal stop to have like these cliffhangers established, and then the next episode is something that flashes back and doesn't logically follow through. You have to wait an episode. And especially I'm a binger. Like I love binging content. Like Netflix was revolutionary because it was all the episodes released, and I still think they do that for the most part. But when Disney and Warner Brothers and all the other companies that are making streaming services start saying, no, we need the water cooler model, we need anticipation, we can't have binging. I'm like, no, like we were in the future, guys. We were there. We were in the future, and you pulled us back to the weekly stuff, and it's garbage. I hate it. But
I
yeah,
agree, though. I do agree.
that's a
They
whole other tangent about content consumption. But
they did that for business reasons.
yeah, oh
Because
yeah,
if you allow you to binge it all, you take a free trial or a
yep,
1 month, originally $8 subscription. You binge watch everything you want to see, and then you cancel it. But now, if
yeah.
they make a show take 3 months, then now they've gotten your money for 3 months instead.
Netflix is doing that now with the Cobra Kai series. I'm a big Cobra Kai fan as well. And they're doing like we're gonna split this season up into 3 parts. We're gonna release, and they're trying to do it like, oh, but you get more episodes, and it's like, no, like you want us to subscribe 3 times if we're gonna, cut off after we watch this. It's all business tactics for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that Disney now is the time to kind of learn how to filter out the good advice, um, and filter in the good advice, like take it in, implement it, and ignore the stupid, just non-constructive, backwards thoughts of like, oh, we don't need a person of color in the lead. Like, no, like
Hmm.
just
Yeah.
focus on better writing, focus on longer production times. That way the story, these special effects could all look great, everything could be in place. We're not in a rush, and we want to tell stories that are worth telling, not to fill a quota.
Yeah. I agree, because it's like there are legitimate criticisms of certain characters and certain themes and things that they've done. uh it's just there's the majority of the negative. They're not listening to the whole, because the majority of the negative is like what you said
Yeah,
is, oh wow, another person of color is a lead, or another woman. And it's like, I get it, dude. Like, I'm sorry, but we can't do Luke Skywalker again and again and again and again.
yeah,
Like, there's it's a gigantic galaxy. There's other people in it, that aren't white blonde dudes, with blue eyes. There's just so many characters to explore, dude. And like I know a lot of people got upset when they basically confirmed that Han, or not Han, excuse me, Lando, bisexual. and people were all mad about that. Even Billy D. Williams basically said that him and Han were lovers
Yeah.
in an interview, and stuff like that. I'm like, dude, even the actor who played him in when did Empire Strikes Back come out? 79 or 80? I think
80.
80 or 81. And the original character who played him, and he's, it's just like, if I get it, those things bother some people, but that's not what my criticisms of the show are. Like you mentioned my stuff with the sectioning in Acolyte, and you're totally right. Like the whole dyad forming and all of that stuff just being in the novelization of it, and that bit, how it being explained, they need to bring it to the screen, because nobody, and I shouldn't say nobody, but your average watcher isn't going to go back and read a whole book just for one tidbit of background info,
Yeah.
to like make some stuff make sense. So I would like for there to be exposition on why she was so strong and how it happened so quickly, but especially like even more about that year, because I believe it's a year of time between episode 8 and episode 9 where she's training with Leia. And so I want more exposition about what did that year that she trained with her look like. You know what I mean? Because all we see at the beginning of episode 9 is her running a training course, getting upset with uh the drone and stabbing it into a tree. And I'm like, okay, so what I get, and it is, to me, it was an ode to Return of the Jedi, or excuse me, to Empire Strikes Back, where Yoda's in the woods with Luke, and they're going basically through an obstacle course in the swamp. So I feel like it was kind of like an ode to that, where she's
Yeah.
doing things similar to her first master. But I agree with you wholeheartedly, where there are legitimate criticisms that are good, that are constructive and aren't just based around what the character is or isn't. So I would love to see more of that. And so, like you said, yeah, I really hope it's not canceled, because I would love to see a Rey movie for us to finally like flesh out her character, and maybe not so many, because another reason we don't learn so much about her is because there's 8 other storylines going around the sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
They're very busy.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with that. I think, the biggest criticism in my kind of, experience with Rey was the Mary Sue aspect. She's too powerful. She didn't earn her abilities. She's just a typical, all powerful female that has no flaws, that, she's, boring. Okay. Well, if you want to kind of use that narrative, sure. I think that there are a lot of struggles she did have that people, forget, and don't really bring up, because it, kind of pushes their belief system out there that, women shouldn't be the lead of Star Wars, but whatever. If you have an all powerful character, Superman is the tent pole for this. Superman can, at certain points in the comic books, he can blow out like a star just by, you know, how can you have, you know, how can you have trials for a character that powerful? How can you have, anything that could stack up to a character with that tremendous power? Okay, I have a suggestion. Make Rey a terrible teacher. Make that the struggle. She is all powerful. She has mastered the Jedi abilities in ways that no one has done in the past, and she's training people who don't have a fraction of that power. And that's her, struggle. Like, I'm trying to lead the next Jedi, era, and I am imbued with all these like natural abilities, and no one else does. And then there's friction between the students and the teacher, where it's like it's like when Luke tells Yoda, like, you make the impossible work, or whatever that line was. Yoda has a lot of these years of training and all of this, knowledge, and Luke had a crash course. And there's that friction and there's that frustration. Is that friction and frustration going to lead these students to the dark side? Like, are they going to be like, well, Rey tapped into something and I can't tap into it using the light side, using her instructions. Can I tap into it using the dark side? Can I tap into it using anger? Like, there's your, story. Like, it's the students rebelling against the teacher. And, maybe like that's how if they want to do a trilogy, maybe that's how the first story ends. where like, Rey has a failed first class that literally goes out into the galaxy with like newfound, abilities and weaponry, and they're causing problems. And she's like, well, I failed. Like this is showing flaws in a character that is by all means all powerful. There's ways to do it. And I think that there's great stories there for the character of Rey. But we have to address the elephants in the room in ways that are constructive. I want to really quickly bring up the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV show. Like, I loved it for the most part. Obi-Wan Kenobi is one of my favorite characters. But there was that character, Inquisitor Reva, played by Moses Ingram. And a lot of people attacked her. A lot of people were really crappy to her on social media. And that's not fair and that's not right. But if you watch that show, my personal opinion of her character is, or not just her character, but the way that she played the character, it didn't belong in the same story because her expressions were so dialed up to 11. And then you have it in comparison with Ewan McGregor, who is very subdued, very, played the character as very kind of calm and focused. And then you have this villain who, in my opinion, went cartoony. That's something that we can address. That's something that we can, criticize. That's something that we could ask, maybe write the character a little bit better. Maybe, kind of have a dialogue with Moses Ingram to be like, hey, like, dial down your acting. Let's make sure that it's consistent with the story, consistent with the other actors. She just felt out of place. But then everybody started taking that criticism and turning it into a racial thing. And I think that is where we fall apart. It's one extreme or the other. You can't criticize an actor for their portrayal, for their character, without delving into, well, your criticisms and your opinions don't matter because fundamentally other people are accusing her, or not accusing her, but attacking her based on her race alone. And now your opinions, which are valid, are now kind of bundled in with, kind of the meaner, nastier aspects. It's like, no, I just want a good story. And I felt like she stuck out. And there's a lot of instances where, actors do that. They just don't feel like they're really dialed into the story and dialed in with the other characters. Totally valid. But if you're bundling everything into sinister criticisms and sinister, opinions, like, you're not going to make good product. You're not going to advance. You're not going to make anybody happy if you ignore it completely or if you cater to it completely. There has to be balance. And that's, I'm worried that we are seeing that with the Rey movie. I'm worried that, the backlash. I remember when they announced it, people were like, why? Rey sucked. Like, why are we even doing this? Like, Rey's a boring character. I feel like Disney is going to be like, all right, you're right. The fans have spoken. They're all negative on this. Not everybody's negative on it, but a big vocal minority on, social media is, we're just going to scrap it and we're not going to mention it. And it's just going to be lost in the vault. When really, like, let's talk about the Rey's weaker points. Let's make a better story. Let's, really try to tell a great story and listen to the fans in the ways that make sense and ignore the fans in the ways that don't.
Yeah.
Yep. And like the one thing with like Reva, like the one thing that peeved a lot of people with Reva and like the Grand Inquisitor and like that whole show in general is the consistency in Star Wars of people being stabbed and surviving it, and then like Qui-Gon just kills over in the Phantom Menace. Like Darth Maul gets chopped in half, and then his anger keeps him alive, and then you got Reva who gets stabbed and sees Anakin's face, which then she's able to draw that as a conclusion of like, oh yeah, he's also Darth Vader because like I sense some of the same energy. I don't know for sure how she knows everything that like how she's able to draw that conclusion. Like, oh yeah, this Jedi that stabbed me is now Darth Vader, even though he's behind the mask. Like, I don't know if it's like some Dragon Ball thing where they can like sense people and they're like, oh yeah, I sense the power levels. That's the same person. Because there's so many people who struggled to determine that Darth Vader and Anakin were the same person.
Yeah.
And so I don't know like where they went with that. And then like the Grand Inquisitor getting stabbed, and then you think he's dead, and then he randomly appears again when like Reva goes to take on Darth Vader, and he's like, and he just randomly shows back up after you believe that he's been dead this entire time. And so I think that was like a lot of the hate, because like honestly, if you take her out of it and the scenes that she's in it, other than the one where she really helps Obi-Wan leave, the show is better without her. And like, and it shouldn't have been that way. The show should have been good with her. Like, we shouldn't have to say if you remove her it's better, because like if you remove her you get an Obi-Wan at his lowest. He no longer trusts the Force. He doesn't really know where he stands. You get to see like this argument between him and Owen, and then you get to see this quest of like why him and Leia kind of know each other, like why Leia knew to tell R2D2 to go find Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
Which is like, I love that was closed up. And then at the end, like, you get to see Obi-Wan become who he is and embrace the Force again and take on Darth Vader. And then you get to see him say, I'm sorry for all of it. And then Darth Vader, Anakin, is like, you're not the one who killed Anakin Skywalker. I am.
Yeah.
And then he just goes, well, then my friend's truly dead. And then you get to understand, why does he call him Darth in A New Hope? And they closed up all these plot holes that they've had open for years, but the only thing that they did that was wrong was Reva. Because if you remove her, the show is better, and it just shouldn't be that
focused.
way. Yeah, she's the one like, oh, we're gonna steal Leia and we're gonna bring Obi-Wan out of hiding because I want to get vengeance. And then like the focus she's supposed to bring is she's the one that tells Obi-Wan that Anakin's alive.
Yeah.
And then after that purpose, she's done. Like, she doesn't have another purpose.
Well, I felt like the whole purpose of her character really was the connection between Vader and Obi-Wan. You know what I mean? Because if it wasn't for her actions, but I do agree with the criticisms of the character itself and how it was played. What I'm saying is I just feel like that's what they used her for. They were like, we need a way for Vader and Obi-Wan to come back together, and for Obi-Wan to learn that Vader is Anakin. Anakin, because at the beginning of the show, he still does not realize that Anakin is alive. He thinks he killed his old Padawan, and so that revelation, is absolutely huge. But then also, it was just superfluous with her fight with the Grand Inquisitor, all of the exposition as far as like her still going after Kenobi and her becoming the Grand Inquisitor. I do agree with I need to know, are the rules changing? Are lightsabers not as deadly anymore? Because there's a lot of people getting stabbed that live, which is fine. I like what they did with Maul, and they explained it through. It was pure hatred and anger that he built himself a new body through the scraps that he had fell upon. But like more explanations on how people are surviving lightsaber stabs.
And there's an easy way to kind of patch that hole. And you touched upon it, but that was something that was explained in the Clone Wars. And let's be honest, not a lot of people watched the Clone Wars because it was animated. The entire purpose of the dark side, the Sith, is to cheat death. Like, that's been established. So when you have, Qui-Gon Jinn getting stabbed, he accepts death. He embraces it. He becomes one with the Force. You could explain this in a line, and Obi-Wan Kenobi would have been a perfect place to do it, because you did feature Qui-Gon Jinn at the end. Like, it could have been touched upon. You have Reva, who is so driven in her hatred and her mission that she basically defies death in an unnatural way. And you could show it having an effect on her psyche, and you can have it, an effect on her body. And this is kind of established. Like, yeah, Sith are harder to kill because they are more devoted and they are more dedicated and they are more resistant to just giving into the will of the Force. That's an easy explanation. Most Star Wars fans would be like, okay, that makes sense. Like, let's, move on. But there's these things that happen, and it drives us crazy because we do want meaning. We do want an explanation. We do want, kind of clarity. But I wanted to mention something from the old expanded universe. Did you guys know how Obi-Wan Kenobi found out about Anakin surviving, like in the old continuity?
No.
Didn't he find out at a bar?
Yes, you will get a kick out of this.
Yeah.
I think he was drunk.
Yeah. It was a book called Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, and I bought it when it first came out. And at the end, there's a little epilogue where it's like Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's in the desert. He's watching like news footage, I think, on the HoloNet of like the galaxy kind of in turmoil, and it shows footage of Darth Vader, and he recognizes Anakin's fighting style because it's very distinct. And he's like, oh no, like this burning body that I left like survived and became this monster. And like it kind of hints that this is the beginning of his plan to use Luke Skywalker as a tool against the Empire. Like kind of, it was very clumsy, it was very silly. I'm glad that they rewrote that in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. That was the reason why the Inquisitor Reva character existed. I think that there could have been a better way. Not just there could have been a better way to introduce the idea of Obi-Wan Kenobi finding out about this without the Reva character, and there could have been a better way to introduce it with the character of Inquisitor Reva. I think, my big criticism of that character, and it's a fair criticism, is that her emotions, her, voice tone, her way of expressing is just too over the top. Historically speaking, when dark side users and the Sith have been portrayed in media, they're calm, they're like kind of Darth Maul, like you can see the anger kind of seething through, but her acting just felt childish and kind of out of place,
Mm-hmm.
especially and I think that has more to do with her being kind of a new actor. Like she, isn't dialed in. I think she's very talented. I'm not saying that she's, a waste of space. I'm not saying that she's, she brought the show down. I'm just saying that she wasn't fitting in a way that, like actors vibe off of each other. And if you have an actor that you're working with who is, here, and you go up here, and I'm doing a visual thing for the people who are just listening, there's a discrepancy that just feels unnatural. And I felt that. And I think that's a valid criticism. I want it to be better. And I think
Yeah.
that it could be if we address these things.
Yeah, if anything, I just feel bad for her.
Mm-hmm.
She was done a disservice. It's not like we're hating on her. We want more for her because at the end of the day, the purpose that she served could have been served by any Inquisitor in that first episode, just to get them to have a conflict for a reason to meet together. Because obviously, like, we know that ever since Anakin was left on Mustafar, like, he wants Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
And and obviously that was the resolution we found, was at the end when he was bested again, the Emperor was like, okay, we're done with Obi-Wan. Like he's the person that we need to keep him in his hut. We don't need him out, because when he's out, he's trouble.
Yeah. No, really, the thing that I would have changed, and Anthony, you touched on that a lot, was the over the topness of the character. Where I'm like, if I was playing a character that was previously almost murdered as a child by now Darth Vader, the Inquisitorius, I would have done the same things that she did, as far as like hiring the bounty hunters and trying to lure Obi-Wan Kenobi out. But my motivation would not have been to make a big spectacle of myself like she does in the very first episode, when they just get wind of a Jedi in that cantina, like, and she makes a big deal, she screws it up and lets the guy get away, which you can say maybe she was doing that on purpose to let him find Kenobi, but really she was just going to kill him. And it was the Grand Inquisitor and the fifth brother that stopped her. So I agree with that, because I'm like, I just don't feel like that character's motivation would be to stand out like that. She'd want to climb the ranks silently by accomplishing things, and that Kenobi was to her the big accomplishment to get her Vader, essentially.
Yeah.
So I wish they would have played that a lot differently as far as how she was as a character.
I just thought of something like what I would have liked to see in that, especially that first scene where they introduce us to the character she's an inquisitor, right? She is basically, kind of interrogating the entire town at this point. Why couldn't she play that scene like Christoph Waltz in Inglorious Bastards, where it's
Okay.
menacing? It's, like, I'm on your side, guys, but the galaxy has an issue with these Jedi, and we need to sniff them out, and the galaxy is going to be better without them, and just raise the tension. And what she did was she came in with a childlike tantrum where her nostrils were flared and, "Give me the Jedi!" And it didn't work for me. I talked to a friend of mine who was he was defending the character. He liked the character and thought that there wasn't any issue with the way that the character was played. He said you have to think about, the progression of the character, how at the end she's not dedicated to anything aside from getting revenge on Vader. And she's also conflicted. And at the end, they heavily hint that she's turned. Like, she, meets Obi-Wan Kenobi and she abandons her pursuits. So she's not committed, and she's trying to act like she's an Imperial purist. So that could be why she was acting over the top. Okay, show that then. Show her conflict, because I thought that her turn at the end was very sudden and not explained. And if there were hints that, like, maybe she has plans to kill the Emperor, or like anything like that shows that she's not a dedicated loyalist to the Empire, would have made that point of her kind of playing over the top to, like, it would have worked. It didn't, though. It did not. And yeah.
Well, really quick, I'm thinking, do you guys want to move on? Our next topic, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but our next topic was going to be Simon Kinberg's alleged Star Wars trilogy. But I'll just start off by saying, Anthony, you touched on it. Dude, I didn't know he directed those X-Men movies. I liked Last
He
Stand.
directed he directed Dark Phoenix. He did not direct The Last Stand, but he
Oh, he
wrote
wrote
both
the
of them.
last. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, see, I like The Last Stand, but I'd have to look at the year, dude, but I couldn't have been older than like 12 years old, I think, when that movie came out. So for me, it was just another X-Men movie, but going back and watching it was definitely a tough watch. And then yeah, Dark Phoenix was kind of all over the place, dude. I didn't feel up or down about it, but I definitely that does make me a little apprehensive. But like Brandon said earlier, he was the executive producer of Star Wars Rebels, which I think is a redeeming factor as far as his knowledge of the franchise, and his knowledge of like what is and isn't. And really, it's not just him. I'm excited for is the kind of people he would bring into the projects. As far as like dude, with him, dude, if he could bring Sam Witwer into live action as a character, I will donate all of my money. I would put, if I had 20 grand, I would send Disney 20 grand to just put Sam Witwer as a character in live action. But that's the kind of people that would be working on it with him, I think, are great. There's so many interviews where you've seen Sam Witwer is the reason why a lot of stuff in Clone Wars made sense, why a lot of stuff in
Yeah.
Rebels made sense, because he was always there giving input to dialogue and story themes. And so I feel like if there's more people like that are working on that project, then I can be excited for it.
I have Simon Kinberg's IMDb page opened up, and this is his writing credits. And I would say he's very hit or miss. Like, he's got some great stuff on there, but there's stuff that really worries me, in terms of someone taking over an entire trilogy as a writer and director. So let's start off with one of his earliest writing credits, which was Triple X State of the Union, which starred Ice Cube.
Not Vin
Mr.
Diesel.
Yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which a lot of people liked. I couldn't stand that.
Oh,
X-Men:
sure.
The Last Stand, Jumper with Hayden Christensen, the one with Michael B. Jordan and Josh Trank. He directed that. He was going to do a Boba Fett movie at one point, but he got fired from that. X-Men Apocalypse is another kind of mark on his resume for me. X-Men Dark Phoenix, and he is working on remake of Logan's Run, and it says Untitled Star Wars Trilogy Episode 1 in development. And again, that hasn't been officially confirmed by Lucasfilm and Disney as far as I know.
But that's on his IMDb.
That's on his IMDb, but anybody can kind of add stuff to IMDb. Like
Yeah.
it's not official in the least. It's spotty, and I'm a little worried about that. We are all in agreement. Rebels is great. Rebels is one of my favorite parts of Star Wars in terms of media, but I'm worried because there are a lot of kind of questionable content on his resume, and I'm going to be honest with you guys. I think the thing I liked the most since Episode 8, which I loved. I love The Last Jedi. The thing I loved the most post Episode 8 was the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian and Ahsoka. I haven't been crazy about anything else, and I feel a little starved as a Star Wars fan. I want something to be good. I want a solid new trilogy. I want a solid new TV show. I want something that resonates with me as a fan. And the thing about Star Wars is it's so big and so massive that there are going to be things that come out that just I'm not the target audience for. And it doesn't appeal to me. I don't, care for the story, but Star Wars is so big that I can always wait for the next thing. I'm not one of these people who are like, I didn't like this, so Star Wars is dead. I'm more of like, I didn't like this, but maybe I'll like the next thing that comes out. Maybe I'll like the next group of characters. Maybe I'll like, the next story. Maybe I'll like the next, twist and turn that comes in the, kind of larger narrative. But as a Star Wars fan, I just want something that I love and I want something that I resonate with. And if this is going to be the trilogy that kind of pushes Star Wars into the next phase, past the Skywalker saga, past, Rey creating a new Jedi Order, I want it to be good. And I'm a little worried that Simon Kinberg will direct something bad as opposed to something like Rebels. That's just me.
I mean, aside from his writing credit, his producing credits are better than his writing credits. Because
I agree.
he was on Logan. He's done the Deadpool movies, which I think earns him when he gets maybe his writing ability isn't the best at times, but when he gets into producing these movies and he gets the control to see maybe hey, I can't write it, but I know what it's supposed to look like if you give me the right script. He really puts everybody in their right places. Now, can he do that in live action? I mean, I hope he can, because obviously animated wise, he can do it. He's done it in Rebels. He executive produced it when he had the control. Like I said, he's done it with Deadpool. He's done it with Logan. He's done it with the TV show Legion. So I feel like he has a good enough understanding that if he surrounds himself with the right people, I think he'll be able to get it under control. And I have 100% faith in him for Star Wars. I think if he's given the control he deserves, I think he can master it.
That is fair. I would say the only thing about executive producing credits is that a lot of times executive producers don't do a lot. They don't really shape the story a lot. It's more of a kind of a financier situation. And he does have great credits. The only reason I'm focusing on his writing credits is because he has been announced as the writer and director. And I'm much more worried about that aspect than kind of because again, I'm not saying executive producers aren't hands-on, but they aren't as hands-on as people realize. So that's just my worry. He's done good stuff, he's done bad stuff. I really, really hope he knocks it out of the park. I just want good Star Wars, but it does make me a little worried that you're giving the franchise, the future of the franchise, what establishes the next chapter, to someone who has such a spotty track record. Like when J.J. Abrams signed on for the first film, The Force Awakens, it made sense because up until that point, his filmography was not bad. It's not a disaster. You either like him and his style or you don't. You either like the lens flares and the mystery box and all those things, or you don't. It's more of a personal preference. He's a great filmmaker, and I would say that he's a good writer. Simon Kinberg has a longer track record, more established writing resume, and it's not 100% great, and it worries me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. It really, and it will be. I don't know. It does make me upset when like the criticisms that I see on like even Skeleton Crew, dude. I I didn't. I basically just said on a post like because all these people were like Star Wars is dead. This isn't Star Wars. Give it back to George. And I'm like, okay. And then I felt the need to comment. I was like, dude, these are kids, so like you can be negative about the show. Like, don't come for the kids. I don't want to see another
Yeah.
Jake Lloyd incident. I don't
Yeah.
want to like be an ass, but be that way towards the adult actors. You know what I mean? If you need somebody to hate on, but like, dude, leave the kids alone. But what I will say is that this next trilogy, if it does happen with Simon Kinberg, he will have to knock it out of the park completely. Obviously, nobody's gonna love 100% of everything that happens in a movie. I mean, some people will, but I'm really hoping that he will do his due diligence. And like I mentioned earlier, I hope he will use the resources that he has, which is people like Sam Witwer and Dave Filoni, who are essentially experts, especially if he's going to dive into the Jedi and things like that. You know what I mean? Like experts on that part of the universe. And so I completely agree with you being worried though about his track record with things. But like I said, I just hope he uses the tools at his disposal to really make this trilogy what fans want to see, even the ones who are just straight up hating for no reason at this point.
I will go into this with the same kind of attitude I did with The Acolyte. I will be cautiously optimistic. I will, say, okay, the trailers look great, but also, there's things that I've kind of heard that just don't really make sense. But I will go with it or go into it with no preconceptions, like no, it's Star Wars. And if I like it, I'll engage with it. If not, I'll wait for the next thing. I do want to touch upon kind of reaching out to actors on social media, that sort of thing. Let's keep these conversations and criticisms purely to the performance. Let's not make it personal. Let's not be mean spirited about the things that we don't like. Let's just have an open dialogue. And as far as the kids go, remember that they're kids. And also remember what happened with Jake Lloyd. Look, kid actors are notoriously finicky because there's very few of them that could act well. Let's just the reality of it. Like sometimes you have your Dakota Fannings, sometimes you have your Haley Joel Osments who can do these Oscar winning performances. Other times kids are just kind of fed their lines and they kind of go through the thing. Don't ruin their fun. Don't go after them on social media. Don't criticize them very heavily. Remember that they're kids. And just
Mm-hmm.
keep your criticisms to a purely entertainment level where it's like, well, your performance was, a little mixed. Or this scene comes off as really weird and silted. You're not saying this person sucks. This person's terrible. This person should never act again. Or even worse criticisms.
Oh yeah,
It's stupid and horrible and has no place in the fandom. You can have your issues. You can even carry on the belief that Star Wars is dead. That's fine. Don't go after people. Like, don't be a monster.
yeah, I agree completely, dude. Oh, sorry, Brandon, go for it.
What I was gonna say was these same people who complain about stuff that Disney's done and like, oh, Star Wars is dead and you need to give it back to George are the same people that bash George for the prequels and even bash George for Return of the Jedi. Star Wars fans have not been pleased since episode 5.
Yeah.
Because episode 6 was the Ewoks, which a lot of people hated, but now they love. And then it was the prequels, and they thought they should have gotten the sequels then. So they hated on the prequels, and then they've hated on the Disney stuff. Star Wars fans are the hardest people to please. It's just something that you can't do, because now what happens is, especially during these large breaks, like the large break between the original trilogy and the prequels, like people build up these headcanons of like, I want to see this, I want to see that. And then eventually what that comes down to is that their headcanons override anything that is canon.
Yeah.
So like, well, if this isn't in my mind, then this isn't it.
People wanted Luke Skywalker to be this just epic, like, just badass. And, like that's their headcanon. So when they saw someone who was vulnerable and who was, kind of weakened by their experience, someone who was dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder after a galactic civil war and didn't have their stuff all together, that's not the Luke Skywalker in their mind. And even Mark Hamill said some things where it's just like, that's not how I saw Luke Skywalker being, Jake Skywalker or whatever. Like you do kind of close off, like, you close off the storyline possibilities if your expectations are a certain way. I love my expectations being deviated. I went into episode 8 thinking that I knew everything that was going to happen. I was completely sidetracked and pleasantly surprised. I know other people weren't, but if you have such high expectations, that's on you. You really do need to kind of go in with, kind of a clear slate and like, all right, like let's have the story happen to me. After that, I can process it. And after that, I can criticize it. But you brought up George Lucas and how everybody's saying like, give it back to George. I would prefer not. Well, George, here's what I want George Lucas to do.
Said
I
would prefer
I would love for George Lucas to be happy, because he is the father of all of this. And you can argue that, he picked and repurposed and did the Quentin Tarantino thing to other science fiction stories and kind of created a hodgepodge so you can question the originality. I don't care to do that. I think he's a genius. I think he created something that had such a profound effect on my life that I continue as an adult to love it, to appreciate it, to engage with it. I mean, there's my cat. His name is Wampa. Like, I named my cat after a Star Wars creature, and my other cat, Ewok, is somewhere around there. I love this world. George Lucas created it, and I will always be in gratitude for that. I think that there was a lot of things in the prequels that were so George Lucas specific that I wish other filmmakers had been able to kind of rein George in, because infamously, if you watch the behind the scenes on episode 1, it is an entire fascinating documentary about people telling George Lucas, yes, sure, that's a great idea. And it's like, these weren't great ideas. And if you watch the behind the scenes features for the original trilogy, you had people like Gary Kurtz who were like, George, this is dumb. Like, let's not do this. You kind of reined in George Lucas. So I want George Lucas to be happy first and foremost. I don't want him to be given control of Star Wars. I don't want him to buy back the rights or anything that, people have suggested, but I want him involved.
Mm-hmm.
I want him involved, and I want him to be kind of a mentor figure. What if we try this? Or, what if, we kind of rein you in this subject, but, let you go full force, pun intended, this thing that you want to do. I don't want George Lucas to be excommunicated from the Star Wars legacy and the future of the franchise. I want him to just be a guiding force for it. And I want him to be happy. And I think he would be happy doing that. But Disney isn't willing to make that work because they're so worried that there's going to be that backlash that the prequels experienced.
So the major issue between George and Disney is that, like, this all started because of a conversation between Bob Iger. They had a meeting to discuss maybe buying it. George originally wanted the Marvel money, which this is all in Bob Iger's book, The Ride of a Lifetime. He wanted the money that Marvel got. And like, they were like, there's been a long pause. There isn't that much coming out. Your series, like, the prequels were hated. It's not as valuable as it was. So we're not going to give you that kind of money, but we're not going to rip you off either. And they put out a feeler, and I think they said like a couple years goes by, and then George comes back to the table. Over here, actually in Disney World at the Hollywood Brown Derby is where they discussed it. So George gives up, like they signed the deal for Lucasfilm to be acquired by Disney, and that's when he actually gives Bob Iger the script for the sequels. And Bob Iger said, and George is kind of like, when are we getting to work on this? And Bob Iger's like, there's no we. And like, that's where the disconnect happened. Was like, George Lucas wanted to sell Lucasfilm to Disney, but he wanted all the creative control he had before. And Disney was like, George, we can't do it because if we do this, like one, creating the original trilogy almost killed George Lucas.
Yeah.
Like legitimately had a heart attack, suffered from panic attacks. Like it almost killed him. So he couldn't do it again at this age, full control. And at the end of the day, who's gonna buy something? Like if you buy a computer from somebody and somebody's like, "Hey, you can only use it when I want you to," it's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
But I think, like what you were saying with J.J. Abrams and Bob Iger made the same mistake, was they discredited everything that was in this sequel trilogy outline. And I don't
The only
know
thing they kept
what
was
they
Luke
did or didn't
Skywalker being in
use.
seclusion.
Yeah.
Like that was the only thing that they kept. That and
Was
I think
what?
they Luke Skywalker being in seclusion.
Oh, okay.
That was a George Lucas idea, and I think George Lucas wanted the lead of the new trilogy, the sequel trilogy, to be female. Everything else was going to be completely different. But I think that completely throwing out all the notes, all the scripts, all the ideas that George Lucas had was detrimental because George Lucas is a fantastic storyteller. Again, he just needs to kind of be reined in. He needs to be checked. He needs to have people who are comfortable enough. And I think that this could have been this could have happened. I think that J.J. Abrams could have worked with George Lucas for like, all right, here's your ideas. Here's what I was thinking. Here's why I don't think that this would work. Ultimately, I have the control. I have the final say. This is what, Bob Iger gave me. Here's where we're going to go. But still involve George Lucas in a way that makes him happy and makes him feel like, his ideas are listened to without cutting him out completely. Because the things that George Lucas says in interviews now about, infamously, and he very quickly retracted this statement, but he said that working with Disney was like being a slave or something. Like he mentioned that was a crazy thing. I'm gonna look up what he exactly
Yeah.
said.
Yeah, because he
No.
had to release an apology. Not
Yeah,
that I don't think he needed. I don't think he should have had to, but they probably have non-disparagement clauses and everything
yeah,
that they signed, so he probably legally couldn't say it. But George is not a guy who could ever let go of Star Wars if it isn't completely taken away from him.
yeah,
Yeah.
This is his baby. This is something he worked on. Now, the difference between the originals and the prequels was that when he went to pitch the prequels and he was like, "Hey, like Steven Spielberg, like I want you to direct the Phantom Menace," Steven Spielberg was like, "Nah, George, like you did such a good job on the original trilogy, like you take this." And then nobody wanted to mess with George's vision because the original trilogy worked, but George didn't direct all the original trilogy. Like there's Irvin
yeah,
Kershner and there's other people involved, and that's what he needed. But at that, and that's why George got all these yeses because nobody else wanted to step in.
yeah. I George Lucas is a much better collaborator than he is like a leader.
He's a Steve Jobs, and he needs his Woz.
Exactly. I have the quote. George Lucas said, "You have to put it behind you, and it's very, very hard. It's a very, very hard thing to do. But you have to just cut it off and say, end of the ball game. I got to move on. Everything in your body says, don't. You can't. These are my kids. All the Star Wars films, I love them. I created them. I'm very intimately involved in them. I sold them to the white slavers that these things," and he trailed off. They wanted to do a retro movie. I don't like that. Every movie, I work very hard to make them different. I make them completely different with different planets, with different spaceships, make it new. So yeah, like he basically said he sold Star Wars to white slavers, and immediately apologized for that because, again, probably a non-disparagement
Well,
clause.
yeah, also kind of a harsh comparison, but
Yeah, yeah,
that's
definitely
wild.
not worded very well in
No,
the
but
2010s when he made that.
I love George for it, dude. I do
Yeah.
because you know what? It's like, dude, I get it. I'd if I had written one of the first big blockbuster that ever really existed, like he was, and the first of that genre to be that big, and for them to, I'll sell you the property, but here are the ideas for the sequels, and they're like, yeah, yeah, female, good, all right, we got everything else besides that, like,
Yeah.
it does make me sad, and I do, like you said, I laughed, but I'm in total agreement with you where it's like I really don't think George needs to be completely in spearheading things on his own, but definitely if you're going to write another sequel trilogy, I hope they do use George Lucas this time, a point of reference for like where, from where it's at now. Obviously this was not George's complete vision for the sequels, but from where it's at now, where does he see it going from there? I would love to
Yeah.
just hear his thoughts on that, because my hopes for the sequel trilogy is I really do want a new Jedi. I want an established new Jedi Order. Like I want to
Mhm.
see like what it looks like after everything has finally been rebuilt, which is what I'm hoping the Rey movie will basically be the connector for that, where it's like we see how the Jedi get rebuilt. Boom, let's skip 15, 20 years and see what happens after, 2 decades of growth in the Jedi Order,
Mhm.
and that's the kind of stuff I want to see. And I want to see a saga as much like, dude, Anakin Skywalker's one of my favorite characters. I love learning more about him. Like Clone Wars, that was so awesome for me to see more of him. And Matt Lanter, I believe is his last name, was Ed did a brilliant job voicing Anakin Skywalker. And I think it was thanks to him that really the fandom started loving Anakin again, or in the first place. But I do want to see more stories that are not directly revolved around his family at all.
Yeah.
Like everything seems like the prequels, the originals, and the sequels all revolved around his family. The sequels were a trek to find Luke Skywalker, learning from Luke Skywalker, learning from General Leia Organa, who was his daughter. It's like, okay, I want to move away from that family lineage and find out more about other extremely talented and powerful characters in the universe.
I agree. I don't think Star Wars can survive in the way that it does now, unless we move to the future. We move away from the familiar. And Star Wars is such a huge world where we can, we can always go back to telling stories that are set in this time period. But, I think the future of Star Wars is either in the far future or the far past. And I would like to see both. I would love to see the old Republic being touched upon. Um, and I would love to see something that's so far in the future where, the characters that we know and love are still there in spirit. They're legends. They're, referenced. They, are there in spirit, but not there physically. But we are introduced to new characters. We are introduced to new worlds. We are introduced to different conflicts, not just empire versus, rebellion of some sort, not just, Jedi versus Sith of some sort. Like, add in a new conflict, make it small scale for once, make it spanning the entire known universe. Like, do something different, because there was too many similarities between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. And I think
Yeah.
that was a big issue I had. And if George Lucas was more involved, if George Lucas's input was more respected, we wouldn't have done that. We would have done something different, and it would have, some of it probably would have worked well, some of it might not have, but it would feel different and it would feel fresh, and we would know that Star Wars was going to continue and not just. I feel like Star Wars is stagnant right now. It's
Well, a lot of it banks off of nostalgia.
nostalgia.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
And so, and that is kind of my issue with it too, where it's like Force Awakens was like, did I just watch A New Hope again. Like I was saying, like that is what I'm hoping is that we do a new story. You know, I don't like you said. I'm so tired of the Empire. It's killing me, dude. There's so many cool big bads that they can bring into things that I'm hoping start. You know, from EU. Obviously, it's not like they've taken a lot from it so far, but you know, with the fact that there's been mentions that they're casting Abeloth for Ahsoka season 2, I'm really hoping that the Yuuzhan Vong get brought into this equation somewhere. I don't know if they're going to do it in the Thrawn movie or if they're how they want to do it, but I feel like they're like the perfect big bad for a new Star Wars universe, even if they wanted to do that one in for the future saga. You know, I feel like them being brought in would a lot of EU readers would lose their minds over it, and also it's just you want a galactic war, they're the best ones to have it with as far as what has been written in EU to my knowledge. You know, they're you can't use the force really against them. You know what I mean? And it makes for an interesting enemy towards a new Jedi Order. You know,
I think that's what they're doing, like with this new High Republic series. I think the issue that they had specifically in the Acolyte was that they didn't go back far enough. So, like when you say it's 100 years before the Phantom Menace, now it's like, okay, well, where's Yoda? Like,
Yeah.
we'll know he's alive, or where's Yaddle because her species should be alive, and who else is going to be alive? Like, it's too close to Anakin to like know what's going on. And then like obviously like you got the fan service of including Darth Plagueis. Though he is around in this period. This is the perfect time period to include him. But at the end of the day, I think the only way to make them happy is exactly what Anthony said. You either have to move it far back or far forwards.
definitely. Well, hey, I'm going to move us into our final topic of the night, which is what you guys should know heading into Skeleton Crew. I'm going to touch on one point. Brandon graciously made us some bullet points on some things, and a few of these things I did not know, which I thought was cool. Not everybody in this show is going to be new. Vane is a part of the Skeleton Crew, and he is one of the pirates seen in Mandalorian season 3, working for King Gorlin Shard to invade Navarro before going rogue to lead him being in Skeleton Crew, which I think is sick. Uh, I thought honestly, Mandalorian season 3 was not like top tier for me, but I did love the Navarro arc with the pirates. I thought that part was really really cool. So seeing one of those pirates from Shard's crew in Skeleton Crew will be super cool, and I am excited to learn more about that time period, you know, where I think Brandon, you said that it's probably in between season 3 Mandalorian and Ahsoka,
It's
right?
it's after Mandalorian season 3. Some people believe it's after Ahsoka. They think that Thrawn could be here, but it's not confirmed whether or not that he is. And like I think the inclusion of Vane is cool because I think he previously popped up in one other episode before the Siege of Navarro, and like people kind of liked the way that he looked. So like originally he was supposed to die with everyone else, but he kind of bails out. So we don't know what leads to him becoming involved in the Skeleton Crew show.
Yeah. So
It's yeah, and it's about four kids. It's not four kids and they're all friends. It's pretty much two groups of friends. There's Wim, who's the main character, and there's Neil. I forget the species that Neil is, but he's not related. Like his species is not related in any way to Max Rebo. But so there's Wim and Neil, and then there's Fern and KB. Those are the four kids. So it's like I don't know how they meet each other. Fern, in my belief, is Fern's mother works for like the school, but like kind of the government. Like it's all kind of weird how everything's playing out in like where whatever planet they're from. So kind of like a troublemaker, and her mom's part of the government. Wim is the main character, and like Fern's mom and Wim's dad kind of meet each other, but Wim kind of like craves adventure, loves like knowing about the Jedi, and is like obsessed with them, which is why like during the trailer, when you see Jude Law's character, he's like, "Are you a Jedi?" Which I don't know entirely if he is. Like I thought I saw a clip where he just responds, "Sure," which is not really like if you're a Jedi, especially like right now, like is a period where you can say that you are. And I just don't think that he is. I don't know if he is force sensitive or if he's another like Haja from Obi-Wan, just kind of like a scoundrel just trying to make money. We don't know the behind the workings of making those keys float that we see in the trailer, but we do know that like he promises to help them find their way home. Like they're working together as a crew, and he's ultimately, I think that he might be a force sensitive who's also just a scoundrel. Like he's not a Jedi. He wasn't trained to be a Jedi. He doesn't like he may not even know all the times why he's force sensitive, but he knows that he's 100% a scoundrel. I forgot to mention Fern's best friend is KB. KB's the tech whiz of the group. I know you guys mentioned last week that you thought it was more like Star Wars Goonies. KB's character is being related to more of like a Data character from the Goonies. So that's like what their role is. And then there could be some underlying tension from the second trailer. So Jod, which is like Jude Law character, he gives control of the ship to Neil, and Wim's like, him? Like Neil? Like you're giving control to Neil, and it's like that could create some tension because Neil, like, for the purposes that we've seen in the trailer, is supposed to be like this cute little creature, kind of like another like established like Grogu or something like the comic relief character like you're supposed to see, but he's like, no, Wim, it's not you. It has to be Neil that pilots the ship because I have faith in Neil. So there could be underlying conflict there between the kids because, like I said, it's two groups of friends that is a 4-man group. So it's Wim and Neil, and it's Fern and KB. And they all work together because Wim's kind of searching through the woods and comes across the spaceship. From what we see in the trailers, he's kind of wandering around. Like I said, he's a kid that craves adventure, and he winds up falling into this spaceship. And I think he tells Neil about it, which probably tells 2 other people because I don't know how they all 4 get on the same spaceship at the same time. What it comes down to is they're investigating an old spaceship that they find, and next thing you know, Wim turns it on and they're taking off, and like now they're lost because they know what their planet is, but nobody else knows where this planet is. Like it's not for some reason that we're seeing in the trailers, it's not in the main knowledge of systems. I don't know if it's like the outer regions or whatever, like where Thrawn is from. It's all like in lesser space, so it just could be like
the
a
unknown.
planet everybody, yeah, like like it's not in the unknown regions. I think it is in lesser space. It's just on a planet that not a lot happens on because it's a like, I mean, it looks like a fairly quiet suburbia where nothing happens. So there's not really a reason for anybody to know what this planet is because everybody who lives there keeps to themselves in their own little suburbia.
Well, yeah, I love the idea of him being force sensitive. I just don't want it to be the titular focus with his character. You know, I love it as character development because also you have to remember at this time, dude. So if this is, we'll just say, just round up and say 10 years after Return of the Jedi, right? That means for the last 30 years, there have been no Jedi. They've been essentially eradicated with the exception of a few Jedi who made themselves a little more known, like Cal Kestis, Kanan Jarrus, and Luke Skywalker, which is, as far as we know, the only Jedi who made spectacles of themselves during those 30 or 10, 20 years that the Empire was active. Like, at this point, dude, depending on how old Jude Law's character is, he wasn't even born when there were still Jedi alive, you know? Or he was very, very young when the Jedi were a thing. So when you get older and you start realizing those things like, oh, I can manipulate certain events or I can move things a little bit. I don't think his first thought is, oh my God, the Force, I'm a Jedi. Like, he's not gonna think that. He's gonna be like, oh, I don't even know what this is, but I can do some cool stuff. So like, I can, and like you said, it's not inherently positive or negative. It's just it's a tool. It's a tool. You know, at the end of the day, he's like, I can do something that other people can't. Cool. You know what I mean? And so I love to see that his character development. I don't want it to be the whole basis of his character. I'm excited for his backstory. Jude Law is an amazing actor. So they really did pick a really good one. And like, not getting into spoilers, just what I've seen with like interviews with the directors, because they had directors for every single episode different. except for the first 2 episodes of it. So what I've seen the director say about Jude Law really is that he was like really able to like inspire and motivate the kids and help them not only get into character but to visualize, because you got to remember they might be like 10, 11 years old, but visualizing things with a blue screen in front of you is not something that is second nature to anybody. You know what I mean? So Jude Law was really able to help them imagine this world and describe what they were seeing in front of them, and that's what I've heard about in the interviews. And I'm super excited. Those kids, like from the trailer, dude, they look like they're going to do well. You know what I mean? As far as the acting aspect of it goes, they all seem like very talented actors. And also it's like, to me, it's not a make or break if the actors know a lot about Star Wars. To me, I mean, do a little bit of research, obviously, but some people were so mad when the one actor from the Acolyte misspoke about, he's like, when Anakin blew up the Death Star, and like I saw that clip like 50 million times a day being like, this is what he said. And I'm like, dude, to be fair, his character doesn't have to know any of that at all. Like, his character is 100 years, and really 120 something years before the Death Star ever gets blown up. So like, it's really not that big of a deal, dude. Yeah. And dude, and like your whole character, honestly, dude, it was perfect that people disliked him because you were supposed to dislike his character. His character was very uppity about his position now that he's a Jedi Knight and he's taking on a Padawan. And dude, I think you were supposed to dislike Yord for the most part. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, but I will say though, I do love. It doesn't matter to me if they don't, but I do still love when they do know about Star Wars. You know what I mean? So I'm going into it with that kind of heart and mind where I'm like, and really I'm watching it because I have a 7-year-old nephew named Nico, who his parents haven't shown him Star Wars yet or anything, and I'm like looking for a good entry point for him to get into it. And I'm hoping that this will be like the thing where I can like tell his parents like, hey, like, it's a kid show. It's, I mean, I'm sure it'll be semi-violent, but he's almost 7. He can handle it, dude. I saw Phantom Menace at 4, dude. Like, I turned out okay. So I'm super excited for that aspect of it. And then, like I said earlier, Jude Law is a brilliant actor. So I'm excited to see what he brings to the Star Wars universe. And a side note, dude, I feel like a bad fan, dude, because I never watched the Solo movie and I didn't realize I had never watched it. So I watched it the other night. The only takeaway from that is Woody Harrelson, baby. That was brilliant. But yeah, like I said, with Skeleton Crew, I'm excited for it. Do you guys think Hondo Anaka is going to make an appearance? What are your takes on that?
I don't know how you have a scoundrel show without him. I don't know how long his species lives, or even how old he is, because he pops up in Clone Wars and he pops up in Rebels. Like, has he survived long enough to be here? I would assume so. I don't know how you don't have a scoundrel show without him in it.
He has to be alive. You know what I mean? So, because that, dude, my 16-year-old heart would give out, to see Hondo Anaka come in, because you always see Hondo have a soft spot for kids anyway. Like the whole arc where he tries to steal their kyber crystals, which is really on brand and hilarious. That he's like, I'm gonna rob some kids, and but you see at the end of that, oh god, I can't remember her name, but her and Hondo share that look, where you almost wish she would leave the Jedi and go become a pirate, but I'm excited for moments like that.
I think this show is going to be awesome. I think it's going to be everything that we've been looking for. I don't know. I don't like to go into things being pessimistic. The only thing that I was going in a little pessimistic for was episode 9. And that's because every single news article was like, not even George Lucas could save it. They've involved George Lucas, but they don't think they could get it turned around. And like, that was the only thing I went into. I was like, this isn't going to be the best. But ultimately, lightsabers are cool, and that's where they fall.
Well, with that, guys, I think we're going to wrap up this episode. Do you guys want to say anything before we close out?
We'll see y'all, hopefully, this time next week.
All right, guys. So make sure, once again, go to our YouTube. Please subscribe. We are anywhere that you guys listen to podcasts, including Apple, Spotify. So drop us a follow on there. And leave some comments on the YouTube video if you guys want to maybe come in and share your thoughts with us on Skeleton Crew. We'd love to have some people's input as well. So with that, guys, we'll be signing off. My name is Charles. That's Brandon. And we also have Anthony Ray Bench. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.